Hi everyone, I just want to do a quick audio test. If you can hear me, click the smiley face on the top of the list of participants. All right, it looks like everybody can hear all right. So I'm just going to wait a few more minutes until to give people a chance to log in. My name is Kelsey Kovner. I'm the Program Assistant for Digital Learning and Engagement, and I'm going to be kind of moderating this webinar. So just hold tight for a few more minutes. All right, let's get started. So, welcome to Sharks of New York. We're going to be hearing a really great presentation from Mary Camhi, followed by a chat with Jenny Wilkins about how to bring the science into the classroom. There's that slide. If anybody is not seeing me change the slides, please raise your hand. Did you see the change? Great. So, everyone should have set up their audio wizard, which can be found right here. And I just want to go over a few of the functionalities of this program. The first is this chat box down here at the bottom. You can type in there at any time. If you have a question, you want to make a comment, feel free. Next we have this little smiley face right here, which is also, these are the functionalities. It can let us know a little bit about how you're feeling, if you want us to speed up, slow down, anything like that. Right here there is a raise your hand feature. So if you have any concerns or you have a really urgent question, you can raise your hand there. This little checkbox is a polling feature. So we might ask you to respond to a yes or no question, or we might pose a multiple choice answer, which will also change that box. Will look a little different. And so let's test this out really quickly. Can you just write a quick hello in the text box down there? All right. I think everybody has responded. Great. So can everyone please let us know where you're joining us from. Here on the right, you'll see an example. You should have a toolbar just like this on your Collaborate on your classroom page. If you click on that little sun image, that's your laser pointer. You can choose there's a few options there. If you just choose there, and then you can click on the map here and say where you're joining us from. All right, excellent. Great to have you all. Just one reminder, feel free to use that text box if you have any questions or if you want to raise your hand, feel free, don't be shy. All right, without further ado, let's get started on this webinar. Our first presenter is Dr. Mary Camhi, who is the director of the New York Seascape program. She has a plethora of knowledge and expertise on sharks, and I'll let her take over from here and do a further introduction. Welcome, Mary. Are you with us?
Can everybody hear me? Can you know somehow that you can hear me? And we can get started?
Why doesn't everybody raise their hand if they can hear?
Great. Okay, good. Thank you all so much for joining, and I'm really glad to be here this evening to talk to you about one of my favorite animals, our group of animals, which are sharks, and to tell you a little bit about what we at Wildlife Conservation Society and the New York Aquarium are doing to help study and protect these animals. Now, I have a lot to cover tonight, and so my hope is that maybe if you have questions as I go through my talk, maybe put them in the chat box, and we can revisit them at the end of the talk, or we'll also hopefully have time for a little Q&A at that point in time. So just to give you an idea of what I'm going to be covering this evening, I'm going to give you an introduction to what Sharks and Rays, what I call Sharks and Rays 101. Sometimes I give this as a whole lecture, and so we're going to be covering quite a bit of material, or maybe not quite as much as I would like to, but a taste of some interesting things about sharks to provide context as we talk about the Sharks and Rays in New York. We'll talk a little bit about what's threatening these animals, because as you'll learn, they are in quite bad shape. We'll zero in and talk a little bit about what's happening right here in New York with Sharks and Rays, and tell you what we at WCS are doing to learn more and to help protect them. So I am going to get started by telling you a little bit about shark and ray biodiversity. Now, when people talk about sharks or other sharks, there is no one species of shark. There are many, many species of shark. And if you look at this slide, you'll see that it's a little bit confusing, the taxonomy and the terminology that we use to refer to these animals. It happens to be a highly diverse group of animals, and only one of two basic orders of fishes, bony fishes, and then sharks and rays, which are also known as convictians or the cartilaginous fishes. Altogether, we right now believe that there are probably over 1,250 species that have been described. And these sharks and rays, they're referred to as sharks, rays, skates, and rat fishes. So there are more than 500 species of sharks, and there are even more species of skates and rays, which collectively we call batoids. It's estimated there are probably more than 600 species of batoids in the world today. And when we talk, you're going to hear me maybe use the word elasmobranch, and this is something that's becoming more and more common in the lexicon. Elasmobranchs refer to sharks, skates, and rays together. And then there's a separate group of animals which I will not talk much about, which are the rat fishes, or what are also known as chimeras. You can see there's very high species diversity amongst these animals, and in part that makes it difficult to help conserve them, because the animals are very different in their life history, their distribution, their biology, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's just important to know that they're not just one kind of shark or ray out there. All right, so let me just give you a quick question here, pose you a question. I just mentioned that there are sharks, and then there are the skates and rays, which collectively are known as the batoids. Can you take a look at this question and tell me what you think is one of the best ways or most consistent ways to tell a shark from a skate or a ray? And you can use your little button there, I think, to choose an A, B, C, or D, or E to answer the question. And Kelsey, if they need more direction, I'll leave you to tell them how to do that. So far, I see only one answer. Anybody else want to guess? Any others? All right, I'll give you 10 more seconds. Keep going. Great. Okay. So the actual answer is B. For those of you who selected B, you were correct. And the reason is that sharks have, and I'll just repeat the answer, sharks as a group tend to have their gill slits, what they breathe through, on the sides of their head, on the lateral side of their body. And then the skates and rays have it on their ventral surface, on the bottom, their bottom-facing surface. Collectively, and I have the word shark here, and I'm just making, I have it in quotes here because when I speak of shark throughout this talk, I want you to realize that I'm also probably collectively talking about skates and rays as well. So collectively, sharks, skates, and rays, I may just refer to as shark. All these animals, all of them, have not a single bone in their body. They only have cartilage for skeletons. They all have naked gill slits, unlike bony fishes, which have an operculum or a cover over their gills. And all shark, skates, rays, chimeras, they all have internal fertilization. The reason why whether it was flat or a torpedo shape was not the right answer is because there are some sharks, and you can see, let's see if I can point this out to you here. This down here is an angelfish. An angel shark, rather, and an angel shark is very dorsal flattened. Whereas among some of the rays, you also have animals like, for example, like this, which is a sawfish, and that's a ray that's very much shaped like a shark. So in general, yes, they are torpedo-shaped sharks and flattened skates and rays, but there are exceptions. Overall, one of the things that we'd like to do, we are referring to, is that some of these animals, we're tending to now talk about sharks as skates and rays as basically flat sharks. All right, and that's because as I will explain to you, skates and rays have a very similar life history, biology, the threats, the conservation, the fisheries are all very similar. And so we're just trying to get people to think of skates and rays very similarly to the way we've talked about sharks. Now, sharks over the past 20 years have really garnered a lot of attention and support from the public. Skates and rays have not. And so part of our mission is to try to give them more love and attention because they certainly need it. All right, so another interesting thing about these animals is that they are distributed in all the world's oceans, except Antarctica. And you can look here to see how they are distributed among the different kinds of habitats. So the vast majority of animals tend to be species tend to be living in coastal waters, but they also can be in very deep waters. Some of them even, like bull sharks and sawfishes, will venture into fresh water as well. And some of my favorite species tend to be the oceanic sharks, blue sharks and mako sharks and freshers, the ones that basically fly the entire ocean. But overall, sharks, skates, and rays tend to be, as you can see here, highly migratory. And what that means is they move across jurisdictional boundaries. They do not respect human boundaries at all as they undertake their annual migrations between feeding and pupping grounds, etc., just like many other animals do up and down the coastline. And that means that they're subject to many different fisheries, many different impacts, making management for them quite difficult. Okay. All right, so when I tell people that I study sharks, probably one of the first things question I get asked is, aren't you afraid of them? Aren't you afraid you're going to be bitten by a shark? And so I think it would be good if we just got this issue sort of out of the way a little bit. And I have a tendency to say to people that I think sharks suffer from an identity crisis. They are, at the same time, some of the most maligned and feared animals in the world, and fierce, but they're also among the world's most vulnerable species. And we'll talk in a minute about why that is. Most vulnerable group of animals. So, as you all are probably familiar with Jaws, when this book and movie came out in the mid-1970s, there really became a huge interest in tackling these animals as, basically the attitude was the only good shark was a dead shark. And so as a result, fisheries started really picking up both on the commercial fisheries and recreational fisheries. So just to put it in perspective, I'm curious, if you raise your hand if you're afraid of actually swimming in the ocean with sharks, knowing that there are sharks here. Just give me a thumbs up if you are afraid of sharks. So a number of you are afraid of swimming in the ocean with sharks. So I'm going to shed some perspective on this. Looking at this question here, how many shark attacks do you think have been recorded in New York waters over the past 175 or so years? Just give me a guess. Can they do a number? Can they type a number?
They can type into the text box if they want to put a number.
Okay, if you want to stick a number in, why don't you do that? Let's just take a wild guess. I'm not sure if I'm seeing the numbers show up here. So I'm going to keep moving and just let you know that there have been no fatal attacks by sharks in New York recorded, as far as I'm aware. And there have been a number of interactions with sharks, but as you can see, quite few, only about 9 over the past 175 years or so. So you have all these pictures here indicate a much higher rate of accident and mortality from these sources, my favorite being the fact that more people are killed by a vending machine like this Coke machine falling on them than they are by shark attack around the world. And I just learned of a really new interesting one, statistic that I'm going to have to look up, and that is that more people are actually die from taking selfies than they are from shark attack. So I hope to help put things in perspective and realize that, we are guests in the ocean, but shark attack is probably highly, highly, highly unlikely. I just when it happens, not common. More, I think, to the point of my discussion tonight is that sharks have much more to fear from us than we do from sharks. And that is because of the life history of these animals. And I have sharks written up here. I also add skates and rays because they have very similar life histories. Sharks and rays tend to grow very slowly. When they do, they reach maturity at a late age. So some animals take 10, 15, 18, even 23 years, like a spiny dogfish, to reach sexual maturity. So that's even longer than humans. Once they do, they often have very low fecundity, only giving birth to a couple of young pups per year every few years. And collectively, this life history, which we tend to call a case strategy life history, suggests that they, as a group, have very low reproductive potential. That means that once the populations have been depleted by something like fishing, it can take decades, if not centuries, for the population to recover. And therefore, they are highly vulnerable to our activities and require precautionary management to keep them from becoming depleted. What is the main threat to these animals? It's largely from fishing pressure. Overfishing is the #1 threat to sharks and rays around the world, and this comes from both commercial fisheries where these animals are targeted, meaning that fishermen are going after the animal as a source of food or for a particular product. They're also taken incidentally or as bycatch in other fisheries. So, for example, many sharks are killed on long lines that are actually intended to catch swordfish and tunas. And then there are also fisheries, anglers, also in some places of the world, including here in New York, so many sharks. So that's the primary source of mortality. One of the reasons why they are so highly desired in fisheries is because the sharks have many desirable products. And I've labeled many of them here. But probably the one you're most familiar with, and if you understand a little bit about the conservation and threats to sharks, is the ones that are circled in red, fins. Since about the 1980s, demand for shark fin has skyrocketed with the opening of China to luxury goods. And as a result, there has been tremendous commercial fishing pressure on these animals in order to create a luxury good, shark fin soup. Now, shark fin soup has been a main driver in these fisheries, but more recently we're seeing that the demand for shark meat as a source of protein is also critically important and a very important source of mortality for these animals. So some of my graphs did not reproduce really well, but if you take a look at this one, you'll see this depicts the global landings of sharks and rays in commercial fisheries going back to the 1950s. And the peak that you see here is 2003, where there was almost 1.3 million metric tons, or approximately between 26 and 73 million sharks were killed every year for the shark fin soup trade. Now, what also is difficult to read is this is the landings of sharks. But the red one is the landings of skates and rays. And what we have come to understand is that the demand for skates and rays and the amount of animals that are moving into fisheries and involved in international trade is as much, if not more, than sharks are. And so therefore, because of their same vulnerable life history, we need to be paying more attention to these animals in terms of their management. The result of all this fishing pressure is the fact that many species are now threatened with extinction on a global basis. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the IUCN Red List, which basically looks at the conservation status of many different kinds of animals and various taxonomic groups. But virtually all the sharks have been evaluated, all 1,200 odd species of them. And what you will see here is that we don't know the status of almost 50% of them, but what we do know the status of these three categories: critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. And then if we include some information that we know about these data deficient animals, nearly 25% of a quarter of the world's sharks and rays are now threatened with extinction. And that has largely been driven by this insatiable demand and fishing pressure and demand for their various products. All right, so that's kind of a broad overview of what's happening in the world of sharks and shark conservation and the issues that we're trying to tackle on a global basis, and WCS is very much engaging at that level. But now I'm going to zero in and talk to you a little bit more about what's happening much more locally in our own backyard. And I want to do that by just introducing you to the work that I'm doing here in the New York Seascape program. So the New York Seascape program is the marine conservation program of the New York Aquarium and the Global Marine Program at WCS. We're based at the aquarium, and our focus is to use science-based, generate science in order to better understand local biodiversity of our marine waters, wildlife that's there. We work to protect and restore threatened species and the habitats that they depend on. And then what we've come to realize is that we can't do that without the support of the public. We need to build local stewardship from our local ocean. Unlike places like San Francisco and Seattle and the Chesapeake, where there's a very vocal marine constituency, we don't really have that here in New York. And so one of our main missions is to try to build what we're calling a New York ocean ethic. And the work we're doing employs 3 strategies. We use research, we're undertaking policy initiatives, and then doing education outreach to try to build that awareness that is so critical to help federate stewardship. All right, so switching to what's going on in New York waters. Now, there are 338 species of fishes, marine fishes in New York waters. One question I have for you is how many of those are skates and rays? So if you want to take a moment to, if you can type in the chat box and put in a number of, whether it's 5, 10, 20, 80, 150, what would you say are the number of species we have locally right here in the New York Bight? And while you're thinking about that, I will just point out that the map that you see here is the geographic scope of the New York Seascape, and basically we cover the waters from Camhi, New Jersey to Montauk, New York, all the way out to the edge of the continental shelf and into the tidal rivers, include Long Island Sound. So that's sort of, I can call it my turf, or I should call it my surf, because that's what the New York Seascape work encompasses. So I don't see any answers here. Maybe I just can't read them, but the answer is that we have nearly 46 species of sharks, scapes, and rays right here in our local waters. And I actually think that it's a pretty high diversity of animals, considering it's about 16,000 square miles of water, and that's a lot of critters. So our job is trying to understand a little bit beyond what's here. And we're asking questions. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about the history, I guess, of the fisheries before I tell you about what we're studying. We've been fishing for sharks, scapes, and rays here in New York waters for well over 150 years. And again, this graph did not reproduce very well, but you can see that we have landings data which we've accumulated going all the way back to the late 1800s. And we still have pretty strong fisheries here today for scapes and rays and sharks in New York. Now, we used to have important shark fisheries. Most of our landings now, as much as I would say 80% of our landings, tend to be scapes and rays. So fewer sharks, many more scapes and rays, and of those sharks, almost all of them are smooth dogfish and spiny dogfish. And you can't really tell the key here, but this blue one it represents the skate. So a lot of skate landings here in New York waters, and those are all commercial landings, largely of 2 species, little skate and winter skate. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing on sharks and skates here in New York. WCS has an aquarium, as you know, I think, in Coney Island, and we have sharks in our collection. And we also have a fair amount of shark expertise on staff. So when the New York Seascape was established as a program in 2010, it made sense for us to start working on doing some research on sharks, partly because WCS is a very science-oriented organization and likes to have sort of their feet on the ground or fins in the water on the species that they work on. So we can bring science to bear for the conservation and policy questions we work on. And so we established a shark research program in 2011 and 12. And that work focused on a number of species. These are what we call our target species, our stars that we're working on in the New York Seascape, including inshore sandpiper sharks and smooth dogfish, as well as I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing on skates a little bit later. And then offshore, we are working with short fin mako and blue sharks. And I'll take a few minutes to try to tell you a bit about what the research entails. So offshore, our species, as I mentioned, are makos and blue sharks. How are we studying these animals? Well, first of all, what are the questions we're interested in? We want to understand beyond what species are here, when are they here? Why are they here? When do they come here? Are they here all year round? What kind of habitats do they use? Do they come back to the same places? Do they, what are they eating? So we're trying to answer some basic ecological questions about their movements and their patterns and their migration routes. And so that we're using satellite and acoustic tagging to do that. So for the offshore species, we are tracking them with satellite tags. We go offshore, we have to catch them by rod and reel. When we do, we affix a tag to the animals, and here you can see one type of tag that we use. Actually, this is a tag, it's an archival tag, and here it is attached to the side of a shark right before the shark was released. We use these tags so there's two kinds of tags. I've just mentioned the fact that we have archival tags, which we call PSAT tags. These tags, like you saw on the last slide, are tags that get affixed to the animal dorsal side with a dart, and the animal then is set free. The tag is programmed to release after a certain period of time. It could be 90 days, 180 days, as long as the battery on the tag will last. And at that point in time, it releases itself from the animal. The tag floats to the surface, and when it gets to the surface, it starts reporting locational depth and temperature data to orbiting satellites. And when that data goes up to the satellite, then gets downloaded directly to one of our computers, and then we can analyze the movements and the patterns of these animals. But it's not in real time. It's after the animal. This is archival data. We also have been using tags called real-time monitoring tags. Spot tags, splash tags are different types, a towable spot tag. And these real-time monitoring tags can only be used on animals that come to the surface. So they're on a regular basis because they have to be at the surface in order to report the data to an orbiting satellite. So they're very commonly used on sea turtles and on whales and other kinds of air-breathing animals, but we learned early on in some of our work that many of our animals come to the surface often enough that the tag can break the surface of the water and can report the location of the animal. And so what we've been able to do with that is we are able to generate a near real-time map, which you can see here. It's a little bit small, but this is one of the sharks that we tagged, and you can see here in August of 2014. It was a juvenile male short-fin mako shark, and it was tagged right here off of Long Island. And the animal spent a number of months actually basically from the late summer to the early fall, just sort of circling around the waters, feeding off down near the Hudson Canyon off of New York, right here offshore. And then it started moving east. And you can see in November here, it started moving east, and it kept moving east. It kept moving further east, so to the end of at Thanksgiving last year, it was way offshore, outside of federal waters, continued to move offshore, and then we lost track of the animal for a while. And we didn't know between all of December and January, we had all of December and all of January, we had no idea where it was. We thought the tag was lost. We thought the animal had, somehow the battery had died, and we'd lost track of the animal. And then all of a sudden, in January, we got an email from actually, we didn't get it until recently, but what we realized is in January, the animal was actually caught by a longline fisherman from Spain, and they returned the tag, not our satellite tag, but a stationary tag to the National Marine Fisheries Service, and so that we now have a full picture of what that animal is doing where and when. And what we realize is that we're learning that these animals are making these massive migrations. Now, this one went directly east. We have another mako shark that actually went, let me see if I can do this with my pointer, if I can show you this. Oh, I can't get this to draw. Okay, well, okay, this will work. We had an animal that moved from Long Island and basically went all the way down the coast and down the coast and down the coast and spent the winter off of North Carolina, and then in February started doing this massive route around the the Atlantic right off of North Carolina, and then ended up back there, and then our battery died away and we lost track of the animal. So we're beginning to understand these large migration patterns, but we need many, many more tags out in order to understand how maybe males move and older sharks and younger sharks move in different places. And so our goal is to keep getting these satellite tags out and eventually try to get those tags projected online or in the aquarium so people can actually follow the real-time movements of these animals. And that's something that we are beginning to work on now. So stay tuned for that. In short, we're trying to talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing on sand tiger sharks. Now, sand tiger sharks are those really toothy sharks that you see, you can see their teeth, and you see them in almost all aquarium collections, including at the New York Aquarium. Yeah, those teeth, they're very evident, but they're not very aggressive animals. As it turns out, these animals are common in New York waters. Not adults, which can reach the size of about 9 feet at maturity, but juvenile animals. And what we have found is that these animals are using the South Shore, the Great South Bay, and our other coastal estuaries as nursery grounds. We have been putting this tag, it's an acoustic tag that's about 3 or 4 inches long, into the belly of the shark. And once it's in there, the tag emits a unique ping that can be picked up by one of these receivers that my assistant Jake is getting ready to deploy in the water. And we hang these off of the buoys in Great South Bay. And what we find, and these receivers can pick up the ping. It's a unique number. It identifies an individual. It can pick up the unique ping of these animals from as far away as almost a half a kilometer, so 500 meters. So we have been able to now track the movements of these sharks, and you can see us sitting here trying to put one of these in the back. Attaching one to the shark here in Great South Bay, and what we are learning is that these animals are coming into, now, I don't know if you're familiar with the South Shore of Long Island, but this is Great South Bay. To the west there, you'd have Jones Beach, and the right you have Mauritius, and they come into Fire Island Inlet in usually early summer, and then they spend time in the bay. They spend the summer in the bay as juveniles, feeding and feasting, and basically what we're learning is these animals are really sedentary. They don't do a lot of movement. They don't leave the bay. They mostly stay here. And you can see right here, this is where we tag the animal, and the size of these little blobs indicates how many times they were heard on a given receiver. So all the dots here, the red dots as well, and the green dots represent where we have our receivers in the bay. This year we had 18 of them. And what we see is that these animals pretty much stay in the same place. When they come in, they move around a bit. We're trying to figure out how we can best show you how they move around the animals, because this is around the bay. This happens to be a very sedentary depiction of how much time they spend at a given spot, but not how they move from place to place. And so we're going to be working on that more next season. But what we have found is that these animals come back year after year. So we have had animals return to Great South Bay every spring for 2, 3, or 4 years. And in October, they exit the bay, they head down south, and because of these acoustic receiver arrays in other parts of on the coast, we know that they go down as far as Chesapeake and probably down over winter around North Carolina. And we're trying to piece together this puzzle of movements of these animals. So this is just one animal. We have tagged 27 animals and are going to continue this work next year because we want to understand what is the activity space, what is the home range of this animal. We have very little information about what's happening out here to the east. We're going to put more receivers out there. And we want to know what these animals are doing, how much they're moving, and what they're eating. All this information is helpful for us to be able to do things like determine whether certain habitats should be protected, if fishing should be avoided in certain areas, why are these, how do we take care of these animals? This particular species happens to be considered to be prohibited from fishing because of their very depleted status, but there are still impacts on them, and we want to know how better to improve their conservation status. So in addition to the field work that we're doing, we are working with the veterinarian staff at the aquarium to understand the health of these animals, the sand tiger animals. We're out collecting blood samples and tissue and genetic samples from animals in the wild so that we can then go and have a good baseline of a wild population in terms of their immunology, their hormone, their virology, their vitamin, and heavy metal contamination, things like that, and then use it to help inform the care of animals in our of these same animals in our captive population. And so we have a great veterinary staff working with us on that. Now I think everybody, this is a video that I'd like to show you. It's a very short video just to give you an idea of the animals we're seeing in the water, but I don't see, it's gonna load, and each of you then is gonna have to click on a button in order to for it to play the video. And it's about maybe 30 seconds. When you see it come up and you see an arrow, just hit that arrow. I can't tell what you're seeing, but I can tell you what species is you're seeing here. And so the first animal you saw there was a blue shark. Now you're going to be seeing two sandbar sharks right here, right offshore. And then this last one is one of the mako sharks, short-fin mako sharks that we were able to put a satellite tag in. So that's with the GoPro. We have lots and lots of video, but we're unable to really, I'm going to stop. How do I stop this now, Chelsea? I just hit stop. I need to get back to, there it is. Okay, great. So we want to be able to share a lot of the video with everybody on our website as that becomes more, once we get that up and running, as well as in the aquarium, tell visitors about the work that we're doing locally. All right, so we can't do this work alone. WCS does not have its own vessel. So we depend on the kindness and expertise of volunteer anglers to take us out fishing and to catch these sharks. We can supply the fuel, and pay for the fuel. We can supply the bait cost, but we can't really afford to pay for the charters. So wherever I go, I always let people know that if you like to fish for sharks, if you know people who do and have a boat and go out fishing regularly and they care about conservation and would like to help us out and do this research, please have them contact us, because we are very much in need of additional anglers to help support this research. It's really fun, and those who do it with us really get out of it. Now I'll tell you another thing about another project that's in the works, and that is a grade A case hunt. It's the grade A case hunt, which we hope to be launching sometime this spring. I'm sure all of you know what a mermaid purse is. A mermaid purse, you see I'm pointing to down here, and as well as a variety of mermaid purses here, are really the 8 cases of skates. Now, only skates lay egg cases, although there are a couple of species of sharks that do. All rays give birth to live young, but all skates lay these egg cases. And usually there's one little baby skate that develops in the egg case. These little tendrils attached to the water and attached to structure on the bottom. And after a number of months, the baby skate escapes from the side of the egg case, swims free, and these egg cases then get washed up on shore. If any of you spend time walking the beaches, you know, I'm sure you have seen these egg cases. And what we are interested in doing is using these, the grade A case hunt, which is a joint project with the Shark Trust of the UK, to get families and kids and classrooms out on the beach to monitor the beaches for these egg cases. We will be developing a lot of outreach and education tools that we can share with you if you guys have any interest in getting your students or going out here on your own or with your family to participate in the grade A case hunt. We'll be building a database to learn about the distribution of these animals, what species they're here, how many, and also to use it as a vehicle to teach people about shark and ray conservation and why it's so critical. And these animals are right here in our own backyard. One of the things I'd love to hear from you at some point is if you know of a beach, especially in and around New York, that has a lot of vacations, where you go out and you see them there often. I'd love to hear from you because we're trying to build an inventory of beaches that have regular numbers of cases washing up, so that we can use them as a way to direct these classrooms and these families to participate in this project. So stay tuned for that. You'll be seeing more. If you're interested, we will be sending you more information about that soon. So take-home messages quickly. As I mentioned, there's no such thing as a shark. York Seascape's rays are highly diverse. We have 46 of them of different kinds in our waters. All of them are very slow to reproduce, and because of that, they're very vulnerable to things like overfishing, and as a result of nearly a quarter of the world's sharks and ray species are now threatened with extinction. And skates and rays are even more threatened and even more hammered by fisheries than sharks. They need love. So we are trying to raise awareness about the plight and vulnerability of these animals. We know for now that New York has some important coastal nurseries. Sand tiger sharks are using our coastal waters to, the young animals come here, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, and they spend the summers here feasting away from predators and growing larger. And so we're studying them to see how long they come back. They exhibit strong site fidelity to come back to the same places year after year. And we know that offshore our waters are very important for some of the highly migratory species like short fin mako and sharks. Sharks and skates have been part of our menu, been part of our fisheries for a very long time, but they have really been hammered. Many of them are in trouble, and we have need to be reining in some of those fisheries, particularly for skates right now. And then we are looking for people like you to participate in the Grade A case hunt, or if you know an angler who would like to get involved in scientific research and conservation, please send them our way. And then finally, I just want to give a pitch for the place that I work, the New York Aquarium. How many of you have been to the New York Aquarium? I hope many. Thumbs up if you have. And if you've been there since Hurricane Sandy, you know that we have really a very big hit. But I'm very pleased to tell you that the next big exhibit that's open there is Ocean Wonders Sharks. It's going to open in the spring of 2017. You can see a visualization here of what it's going to look like on the outside and have an idea of what it looks like from the floor plan on the inside. Big focus on sharks not only here but around the world. What are we doing about them? And when that opens, it's going to be a great platform for us to tell our story about the research we're doing, but also about why we need to do more to help protect these animals. So I really encourage you to come back to that exhibit. Come anytime, and make sure you come once Ocean Wonder Shark opens if you are a shark and ray fanatic like I am. And then finally, thank you to all the people. It takes a village. I can't do this work alone, and this is just a smattering of folks who have been supportive of this work. And thank you very much for all that you guys do to help spread the word and encourage students to be concerned about our marine world and vulnerable species like these sharks, skates, and rays. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was a great presentation. I hope everyone agrees. And I'm really excited to introduce our next presenter, Jenny. She's going to take you through a little bit of a lesson plan on how to bring this science into the classroom. So take it away, Jenny.
Great, thanks. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I get started, I want to make sure that everyone can hear me. So if you can hear me, could you give me a thumbs up or a smiley face? Great. Okay. So today I'm going to chat with you guys a bit about how you can talk about sharks in your classroom. So before we get started, though, I'd like to know what grade groups you guys teach. So in the chat box, could you please tell me what grades you're currently teaching. Okay, so I see that we have a bit of a spread here. There's some pre-K, some elementary, some middle school. The activity that I'm sharing with you today, it's going to be targeted towards intermediate science classes, but however, don't worry, because later on I'm going to speak to some ways an activity like this could be scaled up or down according to your students' needs. So Dr. Camhi spoke a bit about the great diversity of sharks in New York waters. In this activity that I'm going to show you tonight, we're going to discuss some about how these sharks are alike and different. Our essential question that this activity will address is how are organisms classified. I've listed here a few New York State science standards from Living Environment that this hits. Again, this is intermediate level, so these standards are for middle school. So I have listed here the 1.1G, that multicellular animals have similar organs and specialized systems for carrying out major life activities, as well as 1.1H, which says that living things are classified by shared characteristics on the cellular and organism level. In classifying organisms, biologists consider levels of internal and external structures. So biological classifications are arranged from general, like kingdom, to specific, or species. Also, as far as science process skills, we will be hitting 2.1D, which is to use appropriate tools and conventional techniques to solve problems about the natural world, and that includes classification. I do also want to bring your attention to the resources page, and that's where you access this webinar. So make sure to check out the resources after a section. You'll be able to find some materials related to this activity later. So without further ado, let's get started. Dr. Camhi talked about some awesome species of sharks that are found in New York waters. If you were asked to identify these sharks based on their physical characteristics alone, you might be able to do it with no problem. So, for instance, maybe you could identify a mako shark by its teeth or the position of its mouth. The spiny dogfish, perhaps, you could identify it by that characteristic spine on its dorsal fin. The thresher, that long caudal tail is kind of a dead giveaway for that thresher shark. And for instance, with the blue shark, when I see that long, slender body shape, I'm usually able to identify that pretty quickly. However, if I were to switch it up on you and ask about how to identify it by its family, that might be a bit trickier. So in the previous slides when we were identifying with the common names, that might come easy with a bit of practice, and maybe some of your students have a good trained eye. But a question like this might trip them up a bit to pair these family names with the sharks. So that task might be a bit harder, and maybe we wouldn't know right away just by looking at them. So that brings us to a very important question. When scientists are finding a specimen, how is it that they classify this organism? How do they know what it's related to? So luckily, scientists have made a way to help identify organisms, and that's based on their physical characteristics and in some cases their behavior, just by using a chart. This chart is actually known as a dichotomous key. Basically, it's a sequence of steps where you can make choices between different sets of traits, and these alternative characteristics can lead you to the proper classification. So this specific dichotomous key is for shark families, and that's the type of key that we're going to be using tonight. I do want to note that the dichotomous keys can be species specific. The one I'm showing you is just families. The one I'll be sharing with you as well, it's not all inclusive. It's just for 14 different shark families. There are over 30 known shark families. However, if I were to try to fit a dichotomous key like that onto a slide, it would be a bit busy. So I've trimmed it down a bit for you. So the key that we're going to be using tonight, it's based on body shape, fin morphology, which is the structure of the fins, the gill slit number, and the mouth placement. So these traits will help us to identify the shark by family. For our activity tonight, our goal is to use a dichotomous key to identify some sharks, all of which can be found at some point throughout the year in New York waters. And we will be identifying again by the taxonomic family. For this first shark, I'll model how to use a dichotomous key. Later on, we'll identify another shark together, and then after that second shark, I'll put up another image, and you can see if you can use a dichotomous key all on your own. So you'll see here, and I'll see if I can use my laser pointer. I have a photo of the shark as an example, and then I put a dichotomous key here to the right. Under the image, I've supplied you guys with an illustration that it illustrates the different parts of the shark. Oh, what happened? Sorry about that, guys. Can you see the current slide? It looks like I'm so sorry, it looks like we
maybe you can slide, you can go all the way over. Here you go.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Okay. Catch us up here. Okay. So I've supplied you guys with that figure below the image of the shark, and that's going to help point out what these different terms mean. So in the blue box is going to show us what step we're on. That'll take us through. So we're always going to start at step number 1, and we have to choose here between choices A or B. So on step 1, it's talking about the body shape, and it's saying A is asking us whether the body is kite-like if viewed from the top, and B is saying it's not kite-like. From this image, we might not be able to tell, but if we imagined it, we would know that the body here is not kite-like if viewed from the top. So that would prompt us to move over to step 2. Step 2 is about the presence of an anal fin. I've shown here, if you look down at this little figure, the anal fin is that small little fin right before the caudal. In this case, the anal fin is present, so we're going to proceed to step 3. Step 3 is all about the number of gill slits. So if you can see in this image, I know it might be a little hard to tell, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gill slits present. So then we're going to proceed to step 4. Step 4 is asking us about the dorsal fin, whether there's spines or whether there aren't spines. With this shark in particular, I see no spines. It just looks like a regular dorsal fin. So we're going to proceed to step 5. Step 5 is asking us about the positioning of the mouth, whether it's at the front of the snout or if that's the underside of the head. You'll see on this shark it's the underside of the head. So we're proceeding to step 6. Step 6 is asking us about that head shape. So option A is a head expanded with eyes at the ends of the expansion. That would look something like a hammerhead. In this case, our shark doesn't have a head shaped that way, so we would move on to step 7. Step 7 is about this caudal fin, which is that tail fin. It's asking whether the top half of the caudal fin is about the same size as the bottom half, or whether the top half of the caudal fin is different size than the bottom half. In this case, they're pretty evenly proportioned. So that leads us to this family. It's family Lamnidae. So our mako shark belongs to this family. So that's how we use a dichotomous key. Up next, I'd like us to identify this shark together. So if you guys can use your laser pointer tools. This is the image we'll be using as a reference. So using your laser pointer tool, I'd like you to point to the correct box, and then we'll see which steps we have to proceed to. So we're looking at step 1. Do we think the body shape is kite-like or not kite-like? So again, if you can use your laser pointer tool to point to the correct box. Great, okay, so you guys are saying that it's not kite-like if we viewed it from the top, correct? Yeah, so we're going to go on to step 2. Step 2 is, do we see an anal fin there or no anal fin? I'll give a couple more moments in case you guys wanted to point your laser pointers. Okay, so great. That anal fin is actually absent on this shark. I saw that no one got tripped up by that. Those are actually pelvic fins on that shark. So then we're going to jump ahead to step 11. So step 11 is asking us about the shape of the snout. It's asking if there's a long point on the end of the snout. So I want you guys to, when it's saying long point, it would be a really long, pronounced point on the snout. So what do we think? Does it have a pronounced point? So I saw, yeah, so if you're having trouble finding your laser pointer, it's right next to the participants box. It's that second box down. Yeah, so it looks like the sun. Great, okay. So you all pointed to B, which is correct. So this shark belongs to the family Squalidae. It's a spiny dogfish. Awesome work, everyone. So this one I want you to do all on your own. So you have the image of your shark, and I've listed the dichotomous key right next to it. And so using this dichotomous key, find out what family the shark belongs to. And you're going to have a choice from A to D. In this case, you can use the polling tool that's listed right under your name with participants. You can let me know which shark you think this is. So I'll give you a few moments to go through that dichotomous key on your own. So if any of you are having trouble at all, feel free to type in a question for me and I'll try to help out. If you need pointers on how to respond to the poll, there's, if you look for the letter A under your name, and if you hover your mouse over it, you can click the correct response. So I'll give a few more moments for you guys to respond to the poll. So we have a laser pointer on the answer to. Okay, so if you chose D, Elapidae, you were actually correct. This was a thresher that belongs to that family. And the interesting thing here is that alopex is actually Greek for fox, and so that long tail of the thresher shark is what puts it into this family. So you guys did a really great job here of using the dichotomous key. Here I'll list some modifications for you. So in earlier grades, you can focus more on the different body parts of the sharks. So maybe those different types of fins and what the different functions are, you know, or other body parts like the gills or the mouth, and how different species of sharks use these different parts in totally different ways. If you also wanted to practice using and constructing a dichotomous key with elementary schoolers, you could try using everyday objects, such as buttons. You know, buttons come in a wide array of shapes and colors and sizes, so you can maybe try classifying like everyday objects and creating a dichotomous key based on those differences. If we were talking more about high school classes, this would be a great opportunity to start discussing phylogeny, or the evolutionary history of the sharks, and that's when you could really get into why all these different species have such different morphological or structural differences. So if you really liked that activity, if it really piqued your interest, I kind of want to bring your attention to some upcoming teacher workshops that are being held at the New York Aquarium that I'll actually be facilitating. So we have one coming up in April, which is the Natural Inquirer course, and then another in July, which is teaching marine ecology at the shore. If you're interested in any of these courses, you can definitely give us a call or check out that website we have listed there for more information. So that actually concludes my segment. Thanks to everyone so much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Jenny, you can type them into the chat room box. You can also feel free at this time, if you have questions for Mary, you can type those into the box as well, and we'll see if we can get some answers for you. I'll give you guys a few minutes just to type in a couple of questions if you have them.
Jenny, might it be easier for people to ask questions just verbally? Is that possible?
Yeah, I can turn on people's microphones. If anyone has audio enabled on their computer, if you click the talk button at the top of your screen, you can ask your question through your microphone if you prefer that as well. Mary, I don't know if you saw, but Keith just asked a question. He said he noticed all the links about additional information. Is there something about the work that citizen scientists are doing?
Thanks, Kelsey. I can't actually see the questions for some reason, so thank you for repeating that. And hi, Keith. Thanks. So we are trying to get this citizen science project, the Great A Case Hunt, launched sometime this springtime. So we're in the process of gathering information and creating all of the support tools for that. If you are interested in learning more and participating, I think we're going to be providing you with my email address. Please drop me an email. We will get you on a list. And our outreach coordinator, who is helping to organize the Grade A case hunt for Seascape, Becca Kusa, will reach out to you and get you the information and hopefully get you involved. We love that kind of engagement. And particularly of classrooms, et cetera, considering something like adopting a beach that they can monitor maybe on a monthly basis throughout the year. Would be really quite a fun and interesting thing to see what kind of annual variation we see and seasonal variation in these grade A cases washing up on the beach.
I see, Elizabeth, you had.
And if you stay tuned, we'll have.
Go ahead, Mary.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I just wanted to respond to Elizabeth's question. It looks like you wanted clarification on the elementary students modification. So if you wanted to start with an easy task to start talking about classification with your students, one way you could do it is to have your students classify everyday objects that they're really familiar with. So if you didn't want to jump immediately to talking about classifying sharks, you could start off with a task where they could classify everyday objects. So one everyday object that maybe kids could practice analyzing differences about would be something like buttons or other maybe household objects for them to examine. It doesn't have to be buttons necessarily, but that's a good starting point for having students with observation skills and identifying what makes different objects, how to classify objects as different from each other, if that helps to clarify at all. Great.
Does anybody have any final questions? All right, well, thank you all for joining us. We are going to have some more webinars coming up in the near future. We are going to have one in January with Dr. Howard Rosenbaum on whales in our urban environment. And then in March, we will have a talk with Jake LaBelle, who is actually one of Mary's assistants, works with Mary, and he's going to be talking about American eels. And that information can all be found on our professional development website, which you have all logged into to access this webinar. And I also want to remind you that we've added some really great resources on the course site. If you go back to that course page, there are resources and there's also some take action pages. And I think under the Shark Trust section is where there's a little bit more information about the great egg hunt. There might be some more information on there for that. And we're also going to send out an email thanking you all tomorrow with some more information about your PD credits and links to some more information, as well as the information for Mary's email. And if you have any other questions, you can feel free to respond to that. And if you wouldn't mind, I have a quick survey that I'm going to share with you in a similar way that we shared the shark video. And I will also post it in the chat here if you wouldn't mind taking one quick survey at your leisure so we can get some more information about our webinar and make it a better experience for everyone involved. And that wraps up our webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll get you, if you have any more questions, feel free to email. You can respond to any of the constant contact emails you got. And we'll also send out a response tomorrow.